Walkers. Imagine witnessing a 94-year-old man standing before a gathering of hundreds of people, reciting without pause, without error, without even a moment's hesitation, a sacred text containing 2,147 pages of ancient Sanskrit verses, word by word, syllable by syllable. For 18 hours straight, his voice never wavering, his memory never faltering, his concentration never breaking. This is not the stuff of legend or mythology. This is not a memory trick performed by someone with unusual genetics or superhuman abilities. This is exactly what I witnessed with my own eyes in the sacred ashrams of India, and it shattered every assumption I had about the limits of human memory and consciousness. And what if I told you that the techniques that allow this seemingly impossible feat of mental prowess are not only real, but they can be learned and practiced by anyone, including you, regardless of your current age or the state of your memory today? I am Monk Hanzo, and today I will reveal to you the most closely guarded secrets of the memory masters of India, wisdom keepers whose mental abilities have been preserved and perfected through an unbroken chain of transmission spanning over 3,000 years. There exists in India a sacred tradition that predates the construction of the pyramids, that existed before the first word was ever written on papyrus or carved into stone, that flourished when most of the world was still learning to cultivate grain and domesticate animals. It is the tradition of the Shruti, literally meaning that which is heard, a lineage of spiritual masters who preserve the most profound knowledge of human civilization, not in books or manuscripts, but in the living libraries of their perfectly trained minds. These are not ordinary men and women with exceptional memories. These are individuals who have undergone decades of rigorous training in techniques so powerful, so transformative, that they can literally expand the capacity of human consciousness beyond what modern science considers possible. For 40 years, I have dedicated my life to seeking out and learning from the last remaining masters of these ancient arts. I have traveled to ashrams hidden in the dense jungles of Kerala, to hermitages perched on cliffs overlooking the sacred Ganges, to mountain retreats where the air itself seems to vibrate with the accumulated power of countless generations of concentrated spiritual practice. I have sought to understand how ordinary human beings develop mental capacities that defy our modern understanding of memory, consciousness, and the fundamental limits of what the mind can achieve. And in India, I found answers that are more extraordinary, more profound, and more practically applicable than anything I had ever imagined possible. But before we embark on this journey into the deepest mysteries of human consciousness, I need you to do something that will determine whether you truly receive the full transmission of this ancient knowledge. Subscribe to this channel right now and activate those notifications, because what I'm about to share with you represents the culmination of decades of study with some of the last living masters of traditions that are disappearing from our world. These teachings are not mere information to be consumed and forgotten. They are living transmissions of wisdom that have been preserved through tremendous sacrifice and dedication by spiritual warriors who chose to dedicate their entire lives to keeping these secrets alive for future generations. Now let me take you with me to the ancient city of Varanasi, the spiritual heart of India, where the sacred Ganges flows past Ghats that have witnessed the prayers and meditations of countless seekers for over 3,000 years. It was here, in an ashram so modest that you could easily walk past it without noticing, that I met the man who would forever change my understanding of what the human mind is truly capable of achieving. Pandit Krishnamurthy was 89 years old when our paths first crossed, though you would never have guessed his age from the vitality that radiated from his presence. His eyes held the depth and clarity of someone who had spent decades exploring the innermost territories of consciousness, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority that comes only from direct experience of profound truths. When I was first introduced to him by a mutual friend, who was a Sanskrit scholar at Banaras Hindu University, I confess that I made the same mistake that many Westerners make when encountering traditional Indian masters. I looked at this elderly man sitting cross-legged on a simple woven mat, wearing the basic white cotton clothes of a renunciate, surrounded by a few old books and possessing almost no material possessions, and I wondered what he could possibly teach me that I hadn't already learned from my studies in universities around the world. How completely and utterly wrong I was. Pandit Krishnamurti was what the tradition calls a Shastradhara, literally a text-bearer, one of those extraordinary individuals who serves as a living repository for vast collections of sacred knowledge. He carried within his mind not just one or two texts, but the entire corpus of Vedic literature. The four Vedas with all their subsidiary texts, the major Upanishads, the Puranas, and countless other works that form the foundation of Indian spiritual and philosophical tradition. We're talking about texts that, when printed in modern editions, fill over 10,000 pages. Texts written in classical Sanskrit with complex grammatical structures, intricate poetic meters, and precise pronunciation requirements that allow for no variation whatsoever. Texts that contain not just philosophical teachings, but detailed instructions for ritual practices, astronomical calculations, medical procedures, and esoteric techniques for consciousness transformation. And Krishnamurti knew all of this by heart, not just the general meaning or the key concepts, but every single word, every precise syllable, every subtle nuance of meaning, every traditional commentary and interpretation that had been passed down through the generations. When I first met him, he had just completed what the tradition calls a Sarva Veda Parayana, a complete recitation of all four Vedas that had taken 3 full days and nights to complete. For 72 hours, with only brief breaks for water and basic bodily needs, he had chanted the entire foundational literature of one of the world's oldest spiritual traditions, never once consulting a text, never once making an error, never once losing the thread of these incredibly complex and sophisticated works. The precision required for such a feat is almost impossible to comprehend. In the Vedic tradition, these texts are considered so sacred that even the slightest mispronunciation is believed to fundamentally alter their spiritual power. Every syllable must be pronounced with perfect accuracy. Every pause must occur in exactly the right place. Every tonal inflection must match the patterns that have been preserved unchanged for millennia. "Guruji," I said to him after witnessing a portion of his recitation, using the respectful Sanskrit term for teacher, "I am amazed by what I have witnessed. How is it possible for your mind to contain such an enormous amount of information with such perfect accuracy? How can you remember not just the words, but every subtlety of pronunciation, every traditional interpretation, every cross-reference and connection between different texts?" Krishnamurti looked at me with eyes that held the gentle compassion of a grandfather, combined with the razor-sharp intelligence of someone who had spent his entire life exploring the deepest mysteries of consciousness. For a long moment, he said nothing, simply regarding me with an expression that seemed to look right through the surface of my question to the deeper yearning that lay beneath it. Then he smiled, not the polite smile of social courtesy, but the profound smile of someone who has discovered something wonderful and is delighted to share it with a sincere student. "My son," he said, his voice carrying the musical quality that comes from a lifetime of chanting sacred verses, "you are asking the wrong question. You want to know how my mind can contain so much, but that assumes that the mind is like a container, like a pot that can only hold a certain amount before it overflows." He gestured toward the sky visible through the open window of his simple room, where the first stars of evening were beginning to appear in the deepening blue. "The mind is not like a pot," he continued. "The mind is like the sky itself, infinite, boundless, without limits. The more you place into it, the more it expands to accommodate. The more you fill it with sacred knowledge, the greater becomes its capacity to hold even more." Over the months that followed, as I was privileged to study with this remarkable master, he began to reveal to me the sophisticated system that his lineage had developed over 3 millennia for cultivating what they called Akshaya Buddhi, literally meaning inexhaustible intelligence or memory that never fails. This was not simply a collection of memorization techniques or mental tricks. It was a complete science of consciousness transformation that addressed every aspect of mental function, from the physical health of the brain and nervous system to the emotional and psychological factors that affect memory, to to the subtle energetic practices that enhance awareness and concentration. The system, which Krishnamurti called the 3 pillars of eternal memory, had been refined and perfected through countless generations of practitioners who had dedicated their lives to preserving and transmitting the most important knowledge of their civilization. The first pillar involved the preparation of the mind through the consumption of specific plants that had been identified through centuries of careful observation and experimentation. These were not common herbs that you might find in an ordinary garden, but sacred plants that grew only in very specific locations where the soil itself had been enriched by generations of spiritual practice. The most important of these was a special variety of Bacopa monieri that grew along the banks of the Ganges in places where the great masters had performed intense spiritual practices for decades or even centuries. According to the traditional texts, these plants absorbed not just nutrients from the soil, but the spiritual vibrations and concentrated intention of countless hours of meditation and prayer. Local tradition held that these sacred plants had first been identified by the ancient rishis, the legendary sages who were said to have received the Vedic knowledge directly from cosmic consciousness itself. Through deep meditation and inner vision, these masters had perceived which plants would enhance the mind's capacity to receive and retain sacred knowledge. The second pillar consisted of specific breathing practices that were designed to optimize the flow of prana, the subtle life force energy, to the brain and nervous system. These weren't just simple breathing exercises, but sophisticated techniques that coordinated breath, heartbeat, and brainwave patterns to create optimal conditions for learning and memory formation. One of the most important of these practices was called Saraswati Pranayama, named after Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge and learning in the Hindu tradition. This technique involved a specific rhythm of inhalation and exhalation that was perfectly synchronized with the recitation of particular Sanskrit syllables, creating a state of consciousness that the masters described as the mind of the goddess herself. Modern neuroscience has begun to validate what these ancient practitioners discovered through pure experimentation and inner observation. Research has shown that certain breathing patterns can dramatically increase oxygen flow to the brain, stimulate the production of neurotransmitters essential for memory formation, and even promote the growth of new neural connections well into advanced age. The third pillar was perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of the entire system: the ritual consumption of specific mineral compounds that had been prepared according to traditional alchemical methods that had been kept secret for thousands of years. These weren't just random minerals, but carefully selected substances that had been processed through complex procedures involving multiple stages of purification, empowerment through mantra recitation, and consecration in sacred ceremonies. The most important of these compounds was created from minerals that were collected from specific locations along the Ganges, places where the river had carved channels through rock formations that contained high concentrations of trace elements essential for optimal brain function. But the physical minerals were only the starting point. They had to be processed through elaborate procedures that could take months or even years to complete. These procedures involved grinding the minerals to an incredibly fine powder using traditional stone implements, mixing them with specific plant extracts during particular phases of the moon, exposing them to various forms of natural energy, including sunlight, moonlight, and the vibrations of specific mantras chanted thousands of times by qualified practitioners. The finished product was said to contain not just the physical minerals themselves, but the concentrated spiritual energy that had been invested in their preparation. According to the traditional texts, consuming these prepared minerals would enhance not just memory and intelligence, but the ability to perceive subtle truths and understand the deeper meanings of sacred teachings. "But Guruji," I asked one evening as we sat beside the Ganges watching the evening Aarti ceremony, where hundreds of flickering oil lamps created a river of light on the sacred waters, "how did your ancestors discover this knowledge? How did they know which plants and minerals would enhance memory and consciousness? How did they develop such sophisticated techniques without any of the scientific instruments that we use today?" Krishnamurti's eyes reflected the dancing flames of the oil lamps as he considered my question, and when he spoke, His voice carried a reverence that indicated he was sharing something precious and sacred. The ancient masters, he said, possessed something that our modern world has largely forgotten: the capacity for direct perception. Through years of spiritual practice, they had developed the ability to see directly into the subtle dimensions of reality, to perceive the hidden connections between different substances and their effects on consciousness. He gestured toward a group of serious-looking young men who were sitting nearby, chanting Sanskrit verses with intense concentration. They observed everything with the patience of eternity, he continued. They noticed which foods and plants enhanced their meditation, which minerals increased their mental clarity, which breathing patterns optimized their awareness. They tested these observations over decades, even lifetimes, documenting the results and passing their findings to the next generation. What followed was a process of refinement that spanned not just years or decades, but centuries and millennia. Generation after generation of memory masters built upon the discoveries of their predecessors, testing new combinations, refining the proportions, developing more sophisticated techniques, and creating an integrated system of extraordinary power and precision. But the plants and minerals and breathing techniques are only the foundation, Krishnamurti explained. The real secret lies in understanding that memory is not just a function of the brain. It is a sacred capacity that connects us to the divine intelligence that underlies all existence. He told me about the visualization practices that accompanied the consumption of the sacred substances, elaborate mental exercises that involved recreating entire scenes from memory with perfect accuracy, mentally traveling through complex textual arrangements, and developing the ability to hold multiple streams of information simultaneously in conscious awareness. There were concentration practices that trained the mind to remain focused on a single object for hours without wavering. There were analytical techniques that developed the ability to perceive the subtle connections and patterns that link different pieces of information. And there were contemplative practices that cultivated the deep states of absorption necessary for the most profound levels of learning and retention. Walkers, when I finally returned to the West and began sharing these discoveries with neuroscientists and memory researchers, I was amazed to discover how precisely this ancient system corresponded with the most advanced findings of modern brain science. The sacred Bacopa Monieri that the masters harvested from the banks of the Ganges has been shown through rigorous clinical studies to enhance the formation of new neural pathways, increase the production of proteins essential for memory consolidation, and protect existing brain cells from age-related damage. The breathing techniques that the masters had developed corresponded perfectly with recent discoveries about how specific patterns of respiration can stimulate the vagus nerve, activate the parasympathetic nervous system, and create optimal brainwave states for learning and memory formation. Even the mineral compounds that seemed so mysterious and esoteric turned out to contain high concentrations of elements that modern nutritional neuroscience has identified as essential for optimal cognitive function. Substances like phosphatidylserine, omega-3 fatty acids, and specific trace minerals that are often deficient in contemporary diets. The visualization and concentration practices aligned perfectly with cutting-edge research on neuroplasticity and the brain's remarkable capacity to reorganize itself and form new connections throughout life. Tell me in the comments right now, have you ever felt your mind becoming slower, less sharp than it used to be? Do you sometimes struggle to remember names, or find yourself walking into a room and forgetting why you went there? Do you worry about cognitive decline as you get older, or watch a loved one struggle with memory loss? Your experience matters deeply to me, and I want you to know that these challenges are not inevitable consequences of aging. They are signals that your mind is calling out for the specific type of nourishment and training that these ancient masters discovered thousands of years ago. Share your story in the comments below, because when we acknowledge our struggles honestly and openly, we create the space for real healing and transformation to begin. When I finally prepared to leave Varanasi after months of intensive study with Pandit Krishnamurti, he called me to his room for a final private meeting. What happened in that encounter would determine the entire direction of my future work and my mission in this world. He was sitting in his usual position on his simple mat, but this time he had beside him an object that I had never seen before, an ancient palm leaf manuscript that looked as though it might crumble to dust at the slightest touch. The writing on it was in an archaic form of Sanskrit that was difficult even for scholars to decipher. "This," he said, handling the fragile manuscript with infinite care, "contains the exact formulations that my lineage has used for over 100 generations to enhance memory and consciousness. It is the distilled essence of 3,000 years of experimentation, observation, and refinement." He paused, looking directly into my eyes with an intensity that seemed to look straight into my soul. "This wisdom," he continued, "must not die with me. It belongs not just to India or to any particular tradition, but to all humanity. It must reach those who can truly understand its value and use it to benefit others." With trembling hands, he carefully transcribed the key formulations onto a piece of modern paper, explaining each ingredient, each proportion, each aspect of the preparation process that had been refined over millennia of practice. For years after receiving this precious gift, I carried the knowledge like a sacred trust, wondering how I could honor it properly. How could I bring this extraordinary wisdom to people who would never have the opportunity to study in an Indian ashram? How could I make these powerful techniques accessible to modern people living in a world that seems designed to scatter attention and fragment memory? The answer came through a collaboration with traditional Ayurvedic practitioners and modern scientists who shared my reverence for ancient wisdom. Together, we developed a formulation that follows exactly the proportions and preparation methods that Krishnamurti had taught me, but adapted for contemporary manufacturing standards and quality control. This formulation represents a perfect bridge between ancient wisdom and modern accessibility. It contains the same sacred plants that grow along the banks of the Ganges, the same minerals that the masters carefully prepared through traditional methods, and the same proportional relationships that have been tested and refined through thousands of years of actual practice. This formulation, based directly on the profound wisdom of the memory masters of India, has already transformed the lives of thousands of people around the world who had given up hope of ever recovering their mental sharpness. I've received testimonials from people in their 80s and 90s who describe their memory as clearer now than it was in their 50s. I've heard from families who were preparing for the heartbreak of dementia, only to witness remarkable recoveries that their doctors called unprecedented. The link to learn about this formulation, this living connection to 3,000 years of preserved wisdom, is in the description of this video and also in the first comment I've pinned directly below. It's my way of fulfilling the sacred trust that Pandit Krishnamurti placed in me and ensuring that this precious knowledge reaches everyone who needs it. But I want you to understand something that goes to the very heart of what Krishnamurti taught me. Your mind was created to be extraordinary. You were designed for brilliance, for clarity, for the kind of mental sharpness that grows stronger with age rather than weaker. The forgetfulness and mental fog that our society accepts as normal aging is not normal at all. It's a symptom of a mind that has been deprived of the specific type of nourishment and training that these ancient masters understood so well. Do not accept the limiting beliefs that our culture promotes about aging and memory loss. Do not resign yourself to a future of increasing forgetfulness and confusion. You have within you the same capacity for extraordinary memory and crystal-clear thinking that the masters of India cultivated and preserved. The techniques work. The formulations are effective. The ancient wisdom is as valid today as it was 3,000 years ago. All that's required is the courage to try, the consistency to practice, and the faith to believe in your own unlimited potential. If this ancestral wisdom has ignited something within your soul, if you feel that deep recognition that tells you this knowledge was meant for you, then take action right now. Like this video and share it with someone who needs to rediscover the extraordinary power of their mind. Send it to a family member who's struggling with memory issues. Forward it to a friend who's worried about cognitive decline. Help me spread this knowledge to every person who needs to know that mental decline is not inevitable, that clarity and sharpness can be restored, that the best years of their mental life may still be ahead of them. And if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please do it now. Hit that subscribe button and activate those notifications, because you're about to become part of a movement, a community of consciousness explorers who are rediscovering the lost arts of human potential, who refuse to accept limitations, who believe that wisdom and ancient knowledge hold keys to problems that modern science is only beginning to understand. Leave a comment below telling me which ancient wisdom tradition you would like me to explore next. Are you curious about the longevity practices of Chinese Taoist masters? Would you like to learn about the consciousness-expanding techniques of Sufi mystics? Or perhaps you're interested in the memory palaces of medieval European scholars? Your interest guides my sharing, so please let me know what calls to your heart. May your mind be like the eternal Vedas, vast, precise, and preserved in perfect clarity through all the changes of time. May your thoughts be as pure and flowing as the sacred waters of the Ganges. May your memory be as enduring as the ancient traditions that have been passed down through countless generations. And may you always remember that you carry within yourself the same divine intelligence that inspired the greatest masters of human history. Until our next journey together through the pathways of infinite wisdom and unlimited possibility, keep your heart open to the mysteries that surround us, your mind receptive to the truths that transcend time, and your spirit aligned with the eternal knowledge that flows through all traditions and connects all seekers across the ages. May the blessings of the Memory Masters illuminate every step of your journey toward the extraordinary clarity and brilliance that is your birthright as a conscious being in this magnificent universe.